Well, actually, let's go ahead and pray again. Lord, thank you again for this night. Thank you for this time in your word. We remember what Jesus Christ did as a man. And it's important to say, it's not said enough, that his entire life, not just his ministry, not just what we call Good Friday, was suffering. His entire life was suffering, and it was difficult. And we recognize that he did not belong here. And we are not worthy of him. We have the privilege this night to look at what he did one more time. And we have no right to you. We have no access to you as our God and our Father without his work on this earth, his ministry, his life, his death. So help us in this study. Help us to see the beauty of what he did, his love, yes, his suffering, his pain, his death, but his commitment to his mission as the most selfless act ever done, the most loving act anyone could do, and the greatest sacrifice ever made. So bless this time. We thank you, and we say all of this in his name, Jesus' name. Amen. So most years it has been our tradition to gather on Good Friday. Last year was the exception where we did not. We haven't necessarily always done a study on the events of Christ's suffering and death. Sometimes we have, sometimes we haven't. But many years, I would say most years, we have not, looking back at it, because we talk about it regularly here. And we've made a point. When we start the studies, I said to myself, well, this is going to be in our conversation early and often, and it's not going to be pushed aside because it's at the very center. I mean, the cross is what it is for a reason. Because without that sacrifice, without that death, you and I, as we said, have no access to God. Can't get through to God. We're cut off from God. We have no hope. We have no salvation. And we are still in our sins. So we're going to do something different. And I promised it would be something different because we were in Matthew for all those years. And although it would be good to review it again, we're going to be in John. We're going to be in John for a change. It's going to be John 18 and 19. And we're going to cover a lot of ground. And we're going to just pull out some points as we go through it. Some sections we'll go through quickly. Other sections we will slow down and look at more carefully. And I'm not going to do what I usually do. I'm not going to read through this whole chapter or two. I'm not exactly sure how far we're going to get. I often say that I always send that more on the Wednesday study, but we'll see how far we go. I'm confident you'll be blessed, and if there are questions, just ask them. It's fine, especially since this is more of a single study. We are going to read through it, beginning in Matthew. Excuse me. So you say Matthew, That's what we did on Wednesday. We did Matthew again, but we're going to be in John 18. But before we start, in our study, this is a review, just pointing out 4 or 5 things that we're concerned with to remember is, who God is. Let's start there. I mean, the most basic thing, but sadly it's missed. Who God is. What is the gospel and salvation? Or I should back up. So who is God is number one. Who are we as man? Because if you don't understand those 2 questions, what we're going to say tonight ain't going to mean very much. Number 3, the gospel and salvation. Number 4, we talk about discipleship very much, just a lot here. Discipleship. And then the fruit of saving faith, sanctification, and doing the will of God. So I put those 5 points as things of major importance and concern to us in our studies. And I am a little slower due to the night being busy, so be patient with me where you can. We're going to keep going. I just repeat again, especially for you, Michelle, ask your questions, fire away with the questions at any time. It's fine. To John 18. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples, and I have to say those words were his upper room discourse and arguably the greatest prayer in all of Scripture in John 17. Take your pick. I'm not going to make a choice today, but between John 17 and then the Lord's Prayer, the 2 great prayers of Jesus, very different. Wish we could have gone over that. We actually did one time, one study, but those are the words he said most recently, his great prayer in John 17. And I should actually say one more thing too before we get into this, because when we're in John, this is very different than what we have with Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Synoptic Gospels, because John is such a different perspective, being, I would say, the closest of Jesus' disciples to him. Peter would see it differently, but I would say John was, based on, what we have in this book and just the interactions that we have with John. And he stayed closest to Jesus, as we'll see during this time. So, here we go. Chapter 18, verse 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the ravine Kidron, where there was a garden in which he entered with his disciples. And we know this is the Garden of Gethsemane. We spent a lot of time talking about the Garden of Gethsemane in our studies. To me, one of the most overlooked parts of any of the sections in the Gospels. So we're not going to do that today. We're just going to keep going. That if there are questions, ask. So now Judas also, who was betraying him, knew the place, for Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So this is one of the things we pulled when we were studying Matthew, is this was somewhere that Jesus met often with his disciples. It was really a special place for him. It was a special place for them to gather. And it wasn't difficult for Judas to find the place because of that. I mean, I think, it doesn't say it in the scripture, he probably led the soldiers and this group to their meeting place in the upper room first. That's just my opinion, because that's where they were last. But this probably would have been the second place to look for him. Okay, so Judas then, having received the Roman cohort and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Now, one of the surprising things we talked about in this was bringing a Roman cohort into the garden. That was about 600 men into the garden. That's not even counting anyone from the religious leaders or their guards or anyone of their people. We're just talking about Roman soldiers that entered into that garden at night, yes, with torches and weapons. Maybe you can make that work with CG. You can't do that too well. Just can't imagine. 600. Some have estimated maybe with everyone together up to 1,000 men went into the garden after Jesus. A few reasons why, because this is overlooked. They were afraid of him. They were afraid of him because they never denied that he had power. They couldn't. That he was a miracle worker. He simply could do things that other people could not do. That's one thing. Another thing is that they failed to capture him every time at this point for years, whether it was the Pharisees, the scribes, or any attempt by the priests, the Sadducees. They could not get Jesus. And they get the help of the Romans, and we'll develop that, Lord willing, as we go, because the Romans get things done, and that's one thing. That's not all of it, but just the Romans don't play around. If they want to get something done, they'll get it done. And there are no mistakes made with the Romans. They can't mess this up because this is their opportunity. They finally have it. They have Judas, who came to them. It's interesting. They didn't seek Judas out, the priests. Judas sought them out. Actually, I'll turn this to Matthew. I always find this, no need to turn there. I just want to point this out here. That in Matthew 26, it says that then one of the 12 named Judas Iscariot went to the chief priests and said, "What are you willing to give me to betray him to you?" What I find amazing about this is, and sometimes perhaps it's because the accounts have to be kept short, but he doesn't even mention his name. I mean, I believe so much at this point, they really only have one thing on their mind. And he doesn't even have to mention the name. What will you do? What are you willing to give me to betray him to you? And they weighed out 30 pieces of silver for him, which was the price of a slave. So Judas agrees to do this. Okay, back to John. So Jesus, knowing all the things that were coming upon him. So I said the very same thing on Wednesday, that when you're looking at any of these accounts in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, you have to keep two things in mind. And it was explained to me in this way that was very helpful. Look at his two tracks, like train tracks that you follow. One is the sovereignty of God. In this case, that everything God wants to accomplish will be done. The scriptures will be fulfilled. Prophecy will be fulfilled. But then you have another track that is human responsibility. Just because God is sovereign and Christ knows everything that is to come, and that's one of the things that's so terrible for him, is he knew exactly what was going to happen and exactly how it would take place. There was no mystery. It was just actually experiencing it. I mean, he could just taste it, what was before him. but he actually had to eventually go through with it, which didn't make it any better. But the characters involved, meaning the disciples, I should be more specific, the apostles, who are also disciples, and then his enemies, who we can include Judas in there, of course, the priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, Pontius Pilate. They are all still responsible for their actions, and they're held responsible for their actions and what they do during this time. So remember that. I want to pause though. Any questions? Thoughts? Point? So Jesus, knowing all these things that were coming upon him, went forth and said to him, and this is again very different than what we read in Matthew. Again, it's all there, but this is what John includes. Jesus says, "Whom do you seek?" They answered him, "Jesus the Nazarene." He said to them, "I am he." And Judas also, who was betraying him, was standing with them. So when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. See, there was nothing weak about Jesus here. And let's just put that out there up front right away. There was never anything weak about Jesus during any of this time. He was strong all the way through, from his time in the garden to his arrest to all of his 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 trials that he went through before he was crucified. He was strong through all of that, and the entire time on the cross, he was not weak. He did what no one else could do. And that's what we're going to look at here. And I need to move a little faster because I feel like, okay, you're starting to do the Garden of Gethsemane thing again. So let's move. So he says, "I'm he," and there's something we could say about that, but we're going to keep going. But they drew back and fell to the ground. Therefore he again asked them, "Whom do you seek?" And they said, "Jesus the Nazarene." He answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you seek me, let these go their way," to fulfill the word which he spoke, "Of those whom you have given me, I lost not one." Talking about not the 12, but the 11. Because Judas is not counted in that group. Very important that he says, "You have given me, I lost not one." So he didn't lose Judas. Simon Peter, then having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear, and the slave's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put the sword into the sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, I shall not drink it." Let me say that again. "The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it?" So Peter wasn't a total coward. I mean, people make it sound like, he did nothing. It wasn't what Jesus wanted him to do, but he did make some attempt, unlike the others, to defend Jesus. Let's say that. And this isn't the gospel according to Peter. This is John, who credits, again, maybe I shouldn't say credits, but he acknowledges that Peter did this. And those two were very close, though, Peter and John. as you see just later on in John and Acts. I mean, they were really partners. To be very impulsive. Yeah, it's just first. But here's the question. I said the same thing on Wednesday night too. What is the cup? So Jesus is talking about the cup. And it takes us back to Matthew. I'm just going to go there quick because this is great importance as well, like almost everything tonight, where Jesus says when he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, I want to get the exact words here. Okay. And I'll just read this because this is, as I said when we studied in Matthew, awesome. I mean, what he does in the garden is so downplayed, but you see his inner suffering in the garden, which you're not allowed to really even see at the cross. You get to just peer through here just ever so slightly to see his soul suffering. So I'll just read this quick. I'm doing it for Michelle's sake especially, but it's good for everybody. Huh? I said sorry, guys. No. This is to be sorry. This is it's good. A great refresher. Yeah, it has been a while now. So, and I will move on with this Gethsemane scene here, but Jesus says to Peter, James, and John, these three, his inner circle, when they move away from the rest of the disciples, my soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. That's Jesus speaking. He never said anything like that. My soul is so grieved here at this point. It's deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me. And he went a little beyond them, and Luke says it's like a stone's throw. And I always say, I have a really, because I'm a former baseball player, I could throw a stone all far away. Stone's throw. He parts from them, and then he prays. He went a little beyond them, fell on his face, and prayed, saying, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. He wasn't whispering this. I'm not going to yell it, but he is not whispering this in the garden. If it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. Again, this is Jesus. He is now separated from the 11 in the darkness of night, in the garden. He's praying, and he is not just on his knees, he is face down on the ground praying. And we know from other scriptures that he was sweating as if it was great drops of blood. This is what he's experienced. He also is crying out, we know from the scriptures too, to God. And tears are coming down his holy, pure, innocent face because of what he's about to face, deal with here. But what's the cup? That's the question. What is the cup that's before him? That it's right there, and he's saying, let this cup pass from me.
He passed around to everyone and said, drink of this cup. This is my blood shed for you. And I think in the Jewish tradition, it starts with like an H sound.
It wasn't what I was looking for.
That sounds like such an educational answer. Just so the teacher shuts you down. I apologize. What were you looking for?
Well, I'm giving you two the opportunity
I don't know.
It's it. Cup of God's wrath. Now, again, this is so important. I'm going to repeat a few of these things. And you say, I have no time limit. So, right, I can go 5 hours if I need to go 5 hours and I'll faint. But, right.
Don't even look at
Thank you.
the
So, the
God's
cup
wrath.
is the wrath of God. But I'm going to back up just one step or two here. That, again, this is Jesus. I mean, you imagine what they're a distance away from Jesus, the others. I wonder what they're thinking, what he just said. He said, I'm so deeply grieved to the point of death. I haven't said that before. He's going off to pray, and I believe he's yelling. Yeah, there's nothing quiet about this. And he's facing the most intense testing anyone has ever faced. And now he's down on the ground, completely down, face down on the ground. They've never seen him like this before. But this was the one who was fearless of man. He said, fear God. That's who you want to fear, not man. And he never feared man at any point. Never feared man. But in the garden that night, Jesus Christ had a reason to fear. And I point out 4 reasons that, and I don't take this from anyone, this is my own work, 4 reasons I marked down for Jesus being fearful, being afraid of what he was heading to in the garden. Number 1, and there's an order here. Number 1 is that he will bear sin. That's number 1. That doesn't seem like that bad. It's bad, but at first thought or two, it doesn't seem that bad to us. But for him, he who knew no sin, he who was holy and righteous and blameless, sinless.
And he was atoning for the sins of the world, not just.
He is going to bear the sin of God's people, the elect, all of God's people throughout the ages, from the beginning. Adam, Eve, righteous Abel, as he said, all the way down to that time. And then not only that, but those who would come after him. He would be bearing those sins. This is the one that all he ever did was please God. I mean, you can think of it like this. Oh, well, he kept all the laws. He was obedient. He was righteous. Yeah, but that's only going so far. This is the creator of, we go back to Genesis. Genesis chapter 1, the opening chapter of the Bible that we've studied so recently. This is him. He made everything good. And he comes down here and he's going to bear sin, and he agrees to do it. I mean, it's not that God was having to do this. There was a decision made before man was created that this was going to happen, that they would do this, that the Trinity, the Godhead, agreed to create man and that they would save man. But the burden is to say, well, what I've said to this point, that he was righteous and he obeyed. He did what we, again, could not do, where we failed. He succeeded. But he hates sin. He truly hates all sin with his entire being. Right? It doesn't always come through the text, but I always loved one of the first teachers I had was he said one of the marks of Jesus' deity was he knew how to hate. And you just never hear that, but it's so true. You see what he does in the temple because of how these men were acting in the temple. Especially, we can even bring up, he clears the temple once in John, and then we read again of him at the beginning of John, and then we read at the end of his ministry, he clears the temple again. What was he doing? He makes a whip out of cords. He's driving people out. He's overturning tables. He was angry. He was so angry, they never saw anything like that because it was righteous anger, free from sin, from a perfect man, from God. He hated sin. And that's one of the things that drove him to the cross. A hatred of sin. And now he's going to bear that sin and make that sin his own. And I have to say this, I said the same thing on Wednesday night, we'll get to it eventually. This was very personal for him. We make it very impersonal. We make it just like, well, Jesus dies for, kind of an anonymous group of people, and it's effectual only if they choose to believe in him, and, don't think too much about your own sins being laid upon him. But that was not the case. It was for specific people, and it's for all those things, which we'll get into later. But not only that, that scriptures say that he became sin. There was so much sin that was poured on him. And as I said before, it's like the great dump truck of God where he has all of our sins and then he just unloads it on Jesus. That you have all this sin that he became, just a mass of sin. And then he becomes a curse. He's cursed by God being on a cross. That's only part one. I mean, that's only one part of his fear. Number two, because he becomes sin, he has separation anxiety. Separation anxiety. Because of being in the place of the sinner, bearing the sin, and then becoming sin, God must turn away and actually forsake his son. And I think if you read this right in the garden, okay, it doesn't say this, but his heart begins to break in the garden because his joy in this life as a man was doing the will of God and pleasing his Father, having that fellowship, perfect relationship. In his humanity, he is going to be cut off. He never knew what that would be like. And then third, then you have what we talk about in the cup. Because he sinned, so we start off with, he bears the sin, he becomes sin, he's then separated from God, and then third, then God pours his wrath on him. Then he is struck. The shepherd is struck. God strikes his son on the cross and actually punishes him for the sins of his people. which again we'll look more closely at here. And it's something we'll never fully comprehend. It's too much for us to understand that. But God judges him. Instead of judging his people, he judges Jesus and punishes Jesus on the cross. And then fourth, here's one that you'll never wrap your mind or hands around. The immortal God dies as a man. The everlasting God, from everlasting to everlasting, Psalm 90, immortal, invisible, that God becomes a man and he will actually die on the cross. He's life. Jesus said in John 14:6, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. He's going to die. That's more than anyone has ever been up against. Because you know what I didn't even mention with those 4 points? I didn't mention anything about physical suffering. I didn't even mention that. And I didn't talk about it very much because people usually put the emphasis there. You know, they do. I would say most services, most Good Friday services, I mean, they touched on both tonight, but if I was to say, I almost always walk away saying that there's more of an emphasis put on the physical than the soul, because it's more easy to understand. I mean, than the mysteries of what he actually experienced inside, but so much worse.
And it's incomprehensible.
Yeah. But we're going to keep reading. So I want to get that before you because I realize, well, that has to be said. If I start slowing down, I want to get that out. All right. So we were at the end of verse 11, getting back to John 18:11. So we're going to get out of the garden here. So Jesus said to Peter, put the sword into your sheath, and the cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it? So we answered the question about what's in the cup. What's his cup? And he's saying, really, the Father is giving me this cup. I do need to drink it. And it's interesting when you go back to Matthew, last reference for now, in the garden was when he prays, he said, if it's possible. Well, the point is, it was not possible. It was impossible for the cup to be removed for him. I mean, that's why he came for many reasons. But the number one reason he came was cup, to suffer, to die. I mean, just say it now. I've said it before, but he was different than us, because when you think about his life and where he ultimately went, his body was made for this death. I mean, his hands, and I'm not saying an original thing, I'm borrowing this, but his hands were made to be nailed to a cross. His forehead was prepared for a crown of thorns. Think about that from Mary's perspective. That's what your son was born to ultimately do in this life, was to go to that cross. Okay, so let's advance into verse 12. So the Roman cohort, we're talking about 600, and the commander and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. In this section we are going to go through quickly. And led him to Annas first. But I do want to say this, that this is the only account where Annas is mentioned. This is actually the first trial that Jesus faces. And John is very careful to say that he led him to Annas first before Caiaphas. So you go in Matthew where we were in, it starts with the second trial with Caiaphas. Because Annas was really considered the high priest, the real high priest, even though Caiaphas was the high priest. Annas was the high priest before Caiaphas, and he was his father-in-law. So they take him there actually first. Now Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was expedient for one man to die on behalf of the people. Then we go to Simon Peter was following Jesus, and so was another disciple, being John. And let's just remember, yeah, they get some points for being around, but when Jesus was arrested, they all left him, though. They did all, as I say, they ran for their lives. And I'm not putting them down. For the people that want to laugh at them for running for their lives, because where would they most likely go if they're with Jesus? They're going to go to a cross themselves. So Jesus already warned them too, of course. This is how I'm going to die. Not that they understood it, not that they really put it together or remembered, but if they were to follow through and be the faithful guys that said they were going to be, that we're going to be with you till the end, they would have been on crosses too. But that wasn't the will of God. It wasn't. And Jesus even says, basically, arrest me and let them go. That's what he says in John's account here. You seek me, let these go their way. But we also see that. We see that struggle between sovereignty, that it was not in God's will for them to go at that point. But then they're also held responsible for not sticking with him like they said they would. All right, so Peter, in verse 16, was standing at the door outside. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. Then the slave girl who kept the door said to Peter, and we have to say this is also a little different because John is the only one who really has a first-hand account of what happened since he was there. Peter contributed greatly to Mark's gospel, but John was closer to what happened with Jesus than anyone. Peter was standing at the door outside, so the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. Then the slave girl who kept the door said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." So there's denial one. Now the slaves and the officers were standing there, having made a charcoal fire, for it was cold, and they were warming themselves, and Peter was also with them, standing and warming himself. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Very interesting. His disciples and about his teaching. We'll keep going. Jesus answered and said, so I have to say, it's often depicted, and people get the idea that Jesus was just totally silent during his trials. And that was the question we ended up with on Wednesday night, which she was asking me, well, why was he so silent? And I'm like, actually, I wrote it down on a piece of paper today. I just handed it to her. I'm like, okay, we didn't get to it, but here, read this. Number one, it was prophesied that he would be silent. Number two, it was because he was innocent, actually, of the charges. I mean, you could come up with more than I'm saying here. Number three, perhaps the most important, was he was totally, completely committed to going to the cross. He was silent, yes, but at certain points, he did respond, like what we see here. The high priest asks him about his disciples' teaching, and Jesus answered him, I have spoken. Again, there is no weakness here. There is only strength here. I have spoken openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews came together, and I spoke nothing in secret. Why do you question me? Question those who have heard what I spoke to them. They know what I said. And he spoke publicly for 3 years. And if you read the Gospels, he did all this. He was upfront about who he was. Son of God. Son of God. And so many people say, he didn't say he was the Son of God. Well, if you want to just find one place, you can find in his trial in front of Caiaphas in Matthew's account. He says it, of course, in other places like John 8. I mean, it's just people who are just terribly Bible ignorant who say these things. We can find our places where Jesus said, I'm the Son of God. He was honest about who he was, what the kingdom was, the kingdom of heaven. He said what the good news was about the kingdom, how to gain entrance to the kingdom. He taught about what it meant to follow him, discipleship. And then he was telling the truth about eternity. He was telling the truth about his enemies. He exposed them. And of course, that's the reason, well, humanly speaking, why he was there. He exposed their sin, that they were unrighteous, that they were hypocrites. And what comes right before this in Matthew's gospel is Matthew 23. And when you're Matthew 23, it's just ring a bell. Okay, I know exactly what Matthew 23 is. It's Jesus bringing the woes on the scribes and Pharisees. I mean, this is right before he's arrested. And he does it publicly. He didn't do it in a corner in the upper room with his disciples. He did it publicly in front of the people. And then what he did in the temple just that week, which made the priests, of course, irate. I mean, above all else is why? Because he hurt business. Because he hurt their bank accounts, like I like to say. He hit them really where it hurt, above all else. He affected business. Because if you trace this carefully in the Gospels, that his primary enemies all the way through are the scribes and Pharisees. They kind of take a back seat at the end here. It's interesting. You do not even hear a Pharisee mentioned at the cross. It's about the priests, because the priests have the power. But they all come together. They have their differences, like we brought it together in Matthew. But although they have their differences, they agree on one thing. Jesus got to go. That's what they agree on. And he has to be eliminated. Because this council that they come before, you have the high priest, who's a Sadducee. Then you have the Pharisees, but the majority of this council, they are Sadducees who have the power. They're the priests. And then, there's just the minority of the seats on this Jewish Sanhedrin council are Pharisees and scribes. They don't tend to be the wealthy. So that's why you see the priests really are the ones that have the authority. They have the sway. They have really the connection with Rome. So, I'm going to stop for a moment. And are there any questions? How are we doing so far? Okay. But Jesus was honest with the world. I mean, he had his private conversations with his disciples, yes, but regarding his teaching, his doctrine, what he was all about, his mission, it was out there. It was out there, and he was doing that for 3.5 years publicly. And the crowd of thousands heard him. Like you go back to, he fed the 5,000, he fed the 4,000. These people heard him. You think about the Sermon on the Mount, how many people heard him preach and teach. So what he says is very fair. Ask the people what I said. Because again, you're not supposed to testify against yourself. Here's the thing, and I didn't even get a chance to say this about Wednesday night, and we dug into this when we were in Matthew. All of this is so illegal, what they're doing. I mean, the fact that they're holding this trial at night, and the fact that, he has no defense at all. They're making him testify against himself. And of course, they've already made up their minds. Now they just need to go through and get this done and go through the proper channels and get Rome involved. But they've already condemned him. They just need to make it official. So they ask the right questions. So Jesus responds this way to the high priest. And what happens? When he said this, one of the officers standing nearby struck Jesus, saying, "Is that the way you answer the high priest?" Does Jesus back down? Does he change his tune? Does he back off and say, I didn't say I really didn't mean what I said. I'm going to back up and not say anything further. Instead, basically he just got punched in the face. That's what happened. A full strike to the face, though, anyway, more with the backhand fist. Is that the way you answer the high priest? And then Jesus responds, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify of the wrong, but if rightly, why do you strike me?" And the thing is, they never come up with anything. Right? He's the Son of God. That's what they put over his head. King of the Jews. Yeah, that's all they really had on Jesus. He claimed to be the Son of God, and then that he was, well, that's what Pilate puts, King of the Jews, over his head. So Jesus answers. So Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. And here we see the self-control and Jesus once again keeping his perspective, and he is not going to lose it. He is going to stay on track because no one should have ever put a finger on him. He was innocent all the way. because I say this, that he's bound, but he allows them to bind him. Someone stronger than Samson is there. I mean, you have the perfect man there. I don't care if you have him bound with the strongest chains on earth. He can break those chains. He can get out there and he could destroy everybody with a thought. Doesn't do that. So they take him to Caiaphas, the high priest. Now we get to Peter. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. So they said to him, "You're not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I'm not." So here's denial number 2. One of the slaves of the high priest, being a relative of the one whose ear Peter cut off, and said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Peter then denied it again, and immediately a rooster crowed 3 times. Jesus told Peter, you're going to deny me 1, 2, 3 times. And he did. Peter didn't believe it. And I'm going to stop for a moment after this part. But I do turn back to Matthew, because Matthew does provide some more information in this very interesting contrast you have here. In Matthew 26, where you have Peter's denials, and they're just bunched together. That's how Matthew does it. So when he denies Jesus for the 3rd time, Matthew says he began to curse and swear when they asked him the 3rd time. That's how strongly he denied it, that he knew Jesus. And the rooster crows, that I do not know the man. Then the rooster crows. Peter remembered the word which Jesus had said, "Before a rooster crows, you'll deny me 3 times." And then it says he went out and wept bitterly. Because although he failed, Peter did love Jesus. He did follow him as his true disciple for those years. I mean, he made a lot of mistakes along the way. But Peter,
He was very human.
yeah, I mean, that's what you gotta like about Peter, though. I mean, there's no denying the whole time the man means well. I mean, his heart is in the right place, all along. He gets too excited. He jumps into things. He just has to say something so much of the time. He just doesn't slow down. He doesn't think. He just got to say something. He weeps bitterly. And then Matthew puts it like this, that right after Peter's denials, then you have Judas. Now, when morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus to put him to death. And they found him, and they bound him and led him away and delivered him to Pilate, the governor. Then when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that he had been condemned, he felt remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, "I've sinned by betraying innocent blood." Even the man who betrayed him, handed him over to be arrested, he says he's innocent. He's innocent. He didn't do anything wrong. And he even says, "I sinned." I mean, it's hard for people to actually admit. And we don't like saying it ourselves. I've sinned. It's not always easy for us to say that to other people, but to say it to God, just being honest. I've sinned. Betraying innocent blood. And how about the response in Matthew with these? He hands him over to Pilate. And then you have the chief priests and the elders there. And Judas comes to them. And they say, after he admits this, he's innocent. I've sinned. What's that to us? See to it yourself. We don't care. We got our man. We finally got him. And he's going to die. And this is a happy day. This is the best day for them. Because you get rid of Jesus, then things go back to the way they used to be. And they have no concern for truth. No concern for truth at all. They don't care that he's innocent. They don't care that they really don't have anything on him. They hate him. And it can't be said enough. It can't be said strongly enough. They hate Jesus all the way. But I bring this up because you have these comparison now and the contrast between Peter and Judas. And I say, well, what's the difference between these two? And there's something on the divine side, and then there's something you can look at with their actions. So, any thoughts on that? What's the difference between Peter and Judas? Because what you see here is Peter goes off and he weeps. Judas goes to those that he originally met with, Jesus' enemies, and Jesus calls Judas his worst enemy. Think about that, actually. Jesus says to Pilate, the one who betrayed me, he's worse than you. And he's so bad, he said at the Last Supper, it'd been better if he'd never been born. Well, I'll say this, that Judas goes off and he admits he was wrong, he sinned, he gives them the money back. Peter goes off and weeps. And, we don't hear anything else about Peter. But the difference is one's a believer and one's not a believer. One did not actually give up. Peter, as bad as it was, did not give up, while Judas did give up. And, you can get into that because Judas, how can one live with themselves after what happened? Because he knows and he sees when you read that Jesus has been condemned by the Jews. It's not just that they're going to lock him up for a while. They're not going to just do a John the Baptist with Jesus. Just throw him in a dungeon or, put him in prison for an extended time. No, they're going to put him on a cross. That's what they're going to do. This was going to be the worst for Jesus. Jesus doesn't even know the half of it. But Peter repents. Judas just feels sorry. He's sorry for how things turned out. Peter, as you'll see, actually repents. But above all this, though, what's the real difference? The grace of God between Peter and Judas. You have the grace of God. Because again, we're all lost. We're all nothing without God showing grace to anyone. But again, we say the responsibility of these two are still in play just because of that. It does not remove Judas from what he did. It wasn't just, well, I'm just a part of the plan and I helped Jesus get to the cross. It doesn't work that way. And then Peter, even though he's restored by Jesus after the resurrection, Jesus has some words for him. He does. And he definitely remained humble. He was a different man after this. Peter was changed. And he went on to do so many great things in the book of Acts. I mean, he is the leader. He's the leader that he should have been in the Gospels. He does become that man in Acts. All right, so let's pause. Questions, surprises, anything that was unclear at this point? What part, though, specifically talking about with his anger?
I think just in
Yeah, I mean, you see there's that, but you also do see the kindness and the love and the patience he has for so many people. The people he really doesn't have patience for, that he's shorter with, are those religious leaders, as they knew better. They were far more responsible and for the evil they did, and just the position they held.
they have this aspect.
They had, especially the scribes and Pharisees, had scriptures available to them. And then the priests, who had such a responsibility for the people, and these guys, you would expect to be the most moral of men. I mean, again, we're not holding anyone to a perfect standard here, but you expect the most. You expect them to be the finest of men, and here they are putting on trial the Son of God. This is what I should have said. When they went into the garden, realized that they arrested, and they had the full intention of arresting God. That's what they did. They arrested God, and now they put God on trial. That's what they're doing, and they found God guilty in their trials, and then they're going to put God on a cross and watch him die and mock him and ridicule him. They do as much as they can. It's not even just die. Just let him die. But they murder God.
So definitely stay with it. It always rains on Good Friday. Have you guys noticed that? I yet to come. I don't know why they call it Good Friday. I'm always like, you guys killed Jesus. Why is it a Good Friday? But I get it.
Let me say this, that it was funny that I was in this class at church. It was some years ago, and it's a class that the pastor was putting on. He just asked a question. He said, "Well, why do we call it Good Friday, guys?" And I'm looking around, and it's maybe there's a dozen guys, and no one answers. No one answers. Well, I said, "Okay, I'll answer." And it's this, that it was, and I don't think it's a simple answer, really. It's not that simple of an answer. It's not like a 2-sentence answer, but I try to answer it briefly. But I'd answer it a little differently now. But I will say the pastor liked my answer. The thing is, it was the worst day that anyone ever had, right, for Jesus. It was the most painful day, because we mentioned his soul suffering, wrath of God, these unseen sufferings, and then the physical sufferings, which were so terrible to go along with that. But it's good because of what he did for us. Right? It was the worst day anyone could have for him, but it's good for us. But to say it was all bad for him, it's not actually true. You have to step back And you actually have to look at the verses more carefully. The other verses, outside of the Gospels, because this is, as I said already, he's committed to this. This is what he, not that he enjoyed going through all this suffering, but this is what he did to purchase his people because of love. And this was God's plan. This was God's will. And he did it anyway. And once he was done, it's done. And he got his reward for this. And because if he suffered, I mean, it's not that it made him greater, but he gets more glory. I mean, he gets more glory than if he just stayed in heaven, because now he gets the worship of men. And that's so much of that. That's a big part of why it's not everything. It's certainly not everything, but that's part of it, that he gets praised and worshiped by man, his own, saved for what he did. And I also say, without what he did on the cross, we didn't see the greatest act of love. Without that, we didn't see the greatest sacrifice ever given. Without that divine love that goes beyond anything that men can do, right? Because there's nothing I can do for you or you can do for me that can approach this. You can die for each other. You can sacrifice yourself for another person. You can't take someone's hell for another person. You can't do that. That's what he did. Okay, Jesus before Pilate. And we actually are going to zip through this part quick, because we actually need to get to the cross. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium, and it was early, and they themselves did not enter into the praetorium, so that they would not be defiled. Got to comment on that in a moment, but might eat the Passover. Therefore Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" And it's, you got to laugh or you either cry about a lot of these things with the religious leaders, because, they say here that they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium. Again, this is the religious leaders. And now they're worried about defiling themselves when they just did all this illegal stuff to Jesus with the trials, because they believe they're carrying out God's will, right? They believe they're in the right here all the way, because to them, he is the greatest evil on earth. They called him a devil, the devil. So they believe that they are pleasing God all the way with this. So they go to Pilate, and the whole reason they go to Pilate, and it will be explained here, but I want to say a few words, is because the Romans took away the Jews' right to execute anyone. That didn't always necessarily stop them, though, from doing it. They still attempted to stone Jesus before. They didn't go to the Romans and get their permission for that. Their treatment to Stephen in Acts, they stone him. But, they realize that they have to attempt to try and do this the right way, once and for all. They have to try and get Rome to approve. And the thing is, this all comes together because he has to die on a cross. He can't die any other way. It was prophesied that he would die. He'd have to become a curse on the tree. And the prophecies have to be fulfilled. So he has to die in a specific way. And who crucified people? The Romans. So, it comes together in the right way and isn't just like a random way for him to die. So that's how Rome gets involved. But the thing is, Pilate, as you'll see, doesn't want to be involved. He doesn't want to take responsibility for this. And you have to put all the accounts together to see the 6 trials. So what actually happens is he goes to Annas, then he goes to Caiaphas, and then they meet again, the Sanhedrin, and Caiaphas is the high priest, in the morning to officially condemn him with the full council. And then they send him to Pilate. And then and Pilate sends him to King Herod, because Pilate says, I don't want to do anything. It's Herod's responsibility. And Jesus does not say a word, though, to Herod. It's true. He does not say a single word to him during his trial. He's the one that beheaded John the Baptist. I mean, you can think of how Jesus feels about him. And then, Herod just ends up sending him back to Pilate. So those are the 6 trials that Jesus had. Okay, so we're moving on. So Pilate went out and said, what accusation do you bring against this man? They answered and said to him, if this man were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him to you. An evildoer. And Pilate is fearful of the Romans, or Pilate's fearful. Well, he is fearful of the Romans. That is not untrue. He's fearful of the Jews. He's fearful of his superiors, even though he's the governor of this area. There have been a lot of problems with him. We can't get into that tonight. We're going to keep going. So Pilate says, well, take him yourselves and judge him according to your law. And the Jews said to him, well, we're not permitted to put anyone to death, to fulfill the word of Jesus which he spoke, signifying by what kind of death he was about to die. Therefore, Pilate entered again to the praetorium and summoned Jesus, said to him, are you the king of the Jews? And here we have an answer. Jesus answered, are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me? Pilate answered, I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests delivered you to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, my kingdom, and there's quite a bit of dialogue here. My kingdom is not of this world. And think, for Christians, we have to realize this is the kingdom we're in. My kingdom is not of this world. It's not a physical kingdom. That means that's how we need to think too. It's a spiritual kingdom. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting, so I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. Therefore Pilate said to him, so you are a king. And I can't say that the way I need to. Jesus answered, you say correctly that I am a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come to the world to testify of the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. I mean, that's why we hang on to his words. Here it is. I don't know how late it is. We've all had a long week. I'm on the edge of my seat. Because, let me turn to one passage. I turned to this passage last time, but it's just striking me again. In John chapter 6. No need to turn there. I want to get to Peter. I want to say something really good about Peter. Jesus was teaching difficult things, and as a result of this, many of his disciples withdrew and were not walking with him anymore. So Jesus said to the 12, "You do not want to go away also, do you?" He's challenging them. But here we have Simon Peter answered and said, and this is, something I've asked myself in recent weeks. It's like, okay, well, why are you putting all this time into this? Why do you care? Why does this matter? Is this furthering you on this earth? Is this putting any money in your pocket? No, it's not. The world would call us fools right now, right? Why don't you go out to drink? Why don't you sleep? Why don't you just do whatever that makes you feel good? Live it up. It's Friday night. But here's Peter's response when Jesus says, well, do you want to go also? Do you want to be like the rest of them? Do you want to go too? And desert me, leave me, no longer follow me because of what I've said? And he says, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. You have the words of eternal life. And we've believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. Isn't that truth? I keep coming back to that. Isn't that why we're here? We believe you have the words of eternal life, and there's no one else. You have them. And we believe you. We trust you. Not living for this world. We put our eggs put all the eggs, and I'm not even talking about Easter eggs. We put all of our eggs into your basket because we believe you're everything. We believe that you are Son of God, Messiah, King, Lord. That's why we're here tonight. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who hears of the truth hears my voice. And Pilate said to him, what is truth? Not a seeker of truth, like the rest of them. He's not interested in truth. He just wants this to be over. This is just a waste of his time. Here is God standing before him. He doesn't care. He wants this to be over. He doesn't want to be responsible. He wants to he's had enough. That's why I remember writing and saying when we went through this in Matthew is that Pilate, at the end of this, he's just had enough. He doesn't want to hear, especially when you get to later on, he's just had it with everything with Jesus. What is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no guilt in him. He's talked to him. He's not interested in truth. He's not interested in knowing more about Jesus. But he does say, not guilty. I have nothing here. I see nothing. I find no guilt in him. And this isn't everything, I have to say. There's more to this conversation. As we know from the other accounts, this is just what John says. So we're going to kind of fast forward to here in verse 39. But you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you wish then that I release for you the King of the Jews? So they cried out again, saying, not this man, but Barabbas. And Barabbas was a robber. Let's just say Barabbas was a little bit more than a robber. They did not, the Romans would not have a big trial like this for a robber. More on that, though. Verse 1 of chapter 19. How's everyone doing? Doing okay? Okay. Verse 1 of chapter 9. Oh yeah, Michelle, you don't have the physical Bible with you tonight? Okay.
And that's like
That's
some
all
of
right.
your writing, and not your writing. It's different from the Bible because when you read in my Bible, it's the word by word.
Yeah.
Like there was a word where you said he has done no evil or something, and here they said
What
he's
version
not
are
a
you
criminal.
What version are you looking at?
I guess that I can do different versions, but right now it says American Standard Bible. It's your version. Which gives me different.
This is the New American Standard.
Yeah.
I mean, is it fairly close?
Yeah,
What I'm
it's
saying?
fairly close,
Fairly
but
close.
that's something different.
Well, if you go to
Bible
Bible Gateway and look up, you go to Bible Gateway and go up to New American Standard Bible. It should match it word for word.
Gateway, and then version. I have New American Bible Revised, New American Standard Bible.
Try that one, New American Standard Bible.
That's the one where I was just on. And
Really?
now I have New American Standard Bible, 1995.
Oh, try that one,
Yeah.
1995.
Yeah.
I think that's what I have two different versions. I have like the 70s New American Standard, which is actually a little better than this. And then I think this is the 95 one here. All right. So chapter 19 verse 1. Pilate then took Jesus and scourged him. What's the problem with this? Pilate just said he wasn't guilty. He hasn't been condemned. But just scourge him anyway. Why does he do that? To satisfy and try to appease the Jews. Because Pilate wants to punish him, but he's not interested in putting him to death. Though a scourging like this, it wouldn't be surprising if it killed someone. But again, these men are not interested in truth. They're not interested in justice. They're corrupt. They're the men who should not be in their positions. And, there's so much that goes into these trials and the physical suffering of Jesus here. And this all comes before the cross, of course. That, he goes through rounds of beatings before. And even you back up even before that, we talked about what took place in the garden. I mean, what he has suffered inside and then on the outside. I mean, this is, like, as we're saying, the full experience. This is the worst that anyone could go through. You said incomprehensible, Bree. Yeah. Incomprehensible. That, again, he's still, according to Pilate, who's the one who should have the authority here as the Roman governor, he fails to put his foot down. And he's also a weak man and a people pleaser. And he cares about his keeping his position. He cares about keeping his life. And if all these here understood who was before them, as I said, I note this down that, again, Jesus is according to Pilate, which is all that should matter at this point. It's not what the Jews have said, because we already know that they hate him. Pilate has no reason to hate Jesus. Putting Son of God on trial, and you think about him as being the true judge, the final judge, and all of these men. Let's go back to Annas and Caiaphas, the Jewish leaders, and then King Herod, and then Pilate. Imagine what's going through Jesus' head when he's standing. This is the King of Kings. He is truly the King of the Jews. This is the King of Kings, and he's standing before these men. And they're not just men, they are just wicked men. Godless men. And he's standing on trial, doesn't get a fair case. The Jews really can't come up with anything of real substance other than saying, well, he blasphemed, which he did not. And then Pilate says that he is not guilty. I found nothing in him. And then these continue on. This is, I always put down, this is what man does to God. If they ever had a chance to get their hands on God, this is what they wanted to do, and they got their time. They got their day to finally take it out on God. So they have him scourged, and then the soldiers twist together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and put a purple robe on him. I mean, again, I'd like to say a little bit more about this, but we actually need to get to the cross. And they began to come up to him and said, "Hail him, King of the Jews," and to give him slaps in the face. They spit in his face. You read elsewhere. I mean, that is really saying to someone, you are worthless. You are worth nothing. You're dirt. "Hail, King of the Jews." Pilate came out again and said to them, "Behold, I'm bringing him out to you so that you know that I find no guilt in him." So he brings him out after what they've physically done to him, wearing the crown of thorns, saying to the people, "Well, what do you want me to do with him now?" And does he look like a savior now? Is he going to deliver you? He looks powerless. He's defeated. He's physically, he looks half dead. And then here's the Roman governor. He's going to take down Rome now. He's going to deliver you and bring your freedom. Don't think so. And he looks defeated. Jesus then came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." I mean, you could just stop there and just go on at length. Behold the man. Doesn't matter what they did to him physically. There stands the perfect man. There stands the only man who was ever truly good. There he is for everyone to see. And no one there speaks up to defend him. The picture is the crowd is 100% against him. I got to go to Matthew quick because this really drives the point home here. And this is one of the worst things ever said, that Pilate says to them, "What shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ?" And it says here in Matthew's account, they all said, "Crucify him." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they kept shouting all the more, "Crucify him." And I believe, too, that the Jewish leaders would settle for nothing less than crucifixion. Because, again, they didn't just want to kill him. They want him to suffer to the max. Crucify him. And then Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but rather than a riot, and again, he doesn't take any kind of stand for truth. He has no concern for justice. He'll ultimately give people what they want. So instead, he saw a riot was starting. So he took water, washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood, which is not true. He thinks he's innocent, but he can never escape this. Just like the rest of them. Never can escape what they did to him. And they will have to stand account and give an account in the judgment to him. They will be before him, and the tables will be turned. And as the real preachers say, they will melt before his holiness. But listen to what the people say after this. After Pilate says, I'm innocent. And all the people said, his blood shall be on us and our children. So they take full responsibility for it. Glad to do it. Saying, it's on us. That's the scene. Behold the man. And the thing is, here he really is. We've talked about him being the perfect man, the righteous one. But this really is their king, the Jews. This is really their king. And this really is the Messiah, the one that all the prophecies were about. He was finally there. And then they shout for his crucifixion. Behold the man. So when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify, crucify. Pilate said, Then take him yourselves. He's still trying to get off the hook here. And he says, I find no guilt in him. And the Jews answered and said, We have a law, and by that law he ought to die because he made himself out to be the Son of God. So they're talking about blasphemy. Therefore, when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid, and he entered in the praetorium again and said to Jesus, Where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, You do not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you? And I have the authority to crucify you. That's direct. Jesus answered, Think about what he's already gone through and what has been said about him. And this is his opportunity to get out. But he doesn't take it.
Only
Yeah.
on a human level.
Right. And listen to his answer. So Pilate says, I have the authority to release you. Well, he has the authority, but would he really release him? That's the other question. But he says, I have the authority to release you, or I have the authority to crucify you. And Jesus answered, and he remains unchanged. He says, You would have no authority over me unless it has been given you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin. Oh, so he's saying, yeah, you've sinned. You are responsible. And the only reason you have any authority is because God has given you this temporal authority over me. And then the greater sin, as I mentioned earlier, it's Judas, the greater sin. As a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him. So he actually continued to try to release Jesus, though again, he has found nothing wrong. But he didn't try hard enough. If you release this man, this is what the Jews said to him, and this plays a part in it. They said, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar. So they're doing everything they can, because they're saying Jesus is a king. He's dangerous. He has a huge following. And he's an enemy. He's a threat to Caesar. And they've tried this before, again, when they're talking about paying taxes to Caesar. They've tried to trap him, Jesus, with this, but then they use this with Pilate. Therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out, sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. And now it was the day of preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour, and he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." So they cried out, away with him, crucify him." And Pilate said, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." These are supposed to be God's people. And they say, "We have no king but Caesar." In other words, anyone but him. Even Caesar. We would rather have Caesar as king. Because they actually have a good thing for the most part. They've had some problems, but they have a good thing going with the Romans. They have an understanding, at least. The people do want to be freed from Rome. In an ideal world, they would be freed from Rome. But what's great for the chief priests are they do have some authority, they have some religious freedom. And hey, at the end of the day, they're wealthy. Hey, you can't have everything, but in this temporal sphere, they have a pretty good thing going. The problem is Jesus. To them, who's the bigger problem? Rome or Jesus? Caesar or Jesus? It's Jesus. So then they hand him over to be crucified. And you have to see something here, that Jesus has already been condemned by the Jews, and now he has been condemned by the Romans, the Gentiles. So his man as a whole has condemned him. It's complete. So you have Jews and Gentiles. Even though, again, the governor had nothing. And the Jews said he was guilty of blasphemy when he did not. He told the truth. He only spoke the truth. So they took Jesus, therefore, and he went out. And this is a little different than what we find elsewhere. He went out from there, bearing his own cross, to the place called the place of the skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. So he starts off, again, think about the extreme physical suffering he's already went through, and then he has to carry the cross. We know eventually that Simon comes and carries the cross. And it seems like every single person said, well, Jesus couldn't bear the cross anymore. It doesn't say that, okay? It doesn't actually say that anywhere, that he just couldn't bear to carry it any further, or he began to buckle and break. It doesn't say that anywhere. Nowhere. And it's like 90% of the great preachers say that. I don't know why. We're just not given a reason. Maybe, but we're not actually given a reason. I don't care what they did to him. He was always strong. My opinion is probably just wasn't moving quite fast enough for him. That was probably it. But they lead him out to the place of the skull, Golgotha, usually called Calvary. That comes from Latin. There they crucified him. With him, two other men, one on either side, and Jesus in between. And he doesn't describe it. None of them describe it in any detail. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all just say, they took Jesus, therefore, he went out bearing his cross, and then when he gets out there, as far as the crucifixion goes, they crucified him. Nothing else, just kind of matter of fact, that's what happened, because everyone knew what that was like then. It was not an uncommon thing. It was something, thousands were crucified. And he's crucified between these two other men who were probably partners of Barabbas. And I was going to get to the thing about, robbers, that the Romans did not crucify robbers. These men probably were rebels, insurrectionists against Rome. They could very well likely be murderers. Very likely they were actually murderers on Jesus' right and his left. And they put him in the center because he's the prize. He's the main attraction that day, is Jesus. There's going to be a lot to say here, but let's keep going. We're going to get to the points, but we're going to do some reading. So Pilate also wrote an inscription, put it on the cross. It was written, Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. Therefore, many of the Jews read this inscription, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. So the chief priests of the Jews were saying to Pilate, do not write the King of the Jews, but that he said, I am King of the Jews. So they didn't even want that, hanging over him, that he was King of the Jews. And then here's Pilate with the smallest little ounce of strength and authority that he has. What I've written, I have written. That's the only thing he really takes a stand for. That's about all he's good for. I'm not changing it. I'm not going to give in to that. I've given in to everything else, but I'm not going to give in to that. Let's talk about this inscription for a moment. So it's written, Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. So Pilate with this is actually taking a shot and humiliating both Jesus and the Jews with this. That writing that someone was a Nazarene from Nazareth was a great insult. It's basically, you're from the gutter, Nazareth. You're, again, not worth anything. And even it was said, there's nothing good that comes out of Nazareth. This is your king from Nazareth. So, again, that's to be, towards Jesus. And then the King of the Jews, which it's kind of a shot at the Jews. Well, here he is mocking them because, he lost, but at least he gets away with this. And it did upset them that they put that he is not the king of Jews. Just say he said he was the king of the Jews. Okay, verse 23. Then the soldiers, and tonight, this is just a summary. If we were really doing a study on this, again, we'd be here a long time, like we did. When we did our Matthew study on the crucifixion, just on the crucifixion, it was 3 studies. I mean, it was like almost 10 hours altogether that we went over this. So we'll pull out what we can. So then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his outer garments and made 4 parts, a part to every soldier, and also the tunic. Now the tunic was seamless and woven in one place. So, what's so bad about this is, it's a public death. That it's not that he was put to death and he died, before the Sanhedrin or before Pilate. That this was out in the open, and then on top of it, this was during Passover. So you had, they would say Jerusalem would swell up to, could be up to 1 million people in that area at this time. And you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people in Jerusalem, if not more, at that time. And they would always put crosses, they would say, in the main highways where there would be lots of traffic, where people would see them. They weren't just like tucked away somewhere. They divided up his garments. People are not going to like me saying this. It's not family friendly. Jesus was crucified naked. That was the usual and regular practice for crucifixion. This is a public death. Everyone's going to see you. It's the ultimate deterrent to crime, that you leave this world, you're going to die, and you have nothing. You don't even have the shirt on your back. We take everything from you. And here it is for everyone to see. And in that culture, as I've said before, it was not a culture with the Jews where people took their clothes off like today. They kept their clothes on, and nudity was looked down at and frowned at as either, again, highly immoral, or you were poor. You were so poor that you couldn't afford anything. And for them to do this to you, and this is what you're going to be remembered for, this is how you're going to go out like this. It's bad enough for anyone to have this happen to them, but this is Jesus. This is how he was treated, right? The one, you think about that happening to someone you care about, but we are to love him above everyone else. There is no one who is more honorable. There is no one who was more caring, more loving, more truthful. There was no one more good than he was. Yeah, he was perfect in all of his ways, the God pleaser. And this is what they do to him. They did the worst to him. Therefore the soldiers did these things, or I should say, back up to verse 24. Let us not tear it, talking about his tunic, but cast lots for it to decide what it shall be. And this was to fulfill scripture even. They divided my outer garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. It goes back to Psalm 22. And the soldiers did these things. We're going to read through the end of the text, and we're just going to get to verse 30. We're going to pull out some final points, and then we're going to wrap it up. And have time for questions. Time for questions or any discussion. Therefore, soldiers did these things. Think about this. But standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. This from Mary's point of view. This was her son. Indescribable. I mean, what she was feeling, what she was thinking, to see your son, to see this happen to anyone would have been bad enough. But to see this happen to her son, her firstborn, to die publicly, to be as embarrassed, and to have a shameful death like this, and blood everywhere. I mean, the worst pain, the worst suffering. And it's not just that, it's just the mocking from every direction. I mean, if you read this right, I compared all four accounts heading into this, that everyone, I've said this before, everyone piles on when you read this. I mean, it's the religious leaders, of course, who are at the head of this. Then you have the guards, the soldiers who crucified him, which was not normal. They join in on top of it. You have the people passing by, which aren't really in view in John, it is in the other accounts, that are, saying the things they do, casting insults, railing on him. And if that isn't bad enough, you have the two on each side of him that are insulting him. I mean, you think they would be concerned enough with themselves? They're in enough pain themselves. No, let's go after him too. I mean, you just see the evil hearts of men, the total depravity of men on full display here. And it's all towards, I say, the most loving man. Their only hope for salvation is who they're doing this to. Jesus, the way, the only way to God. As you think about everyone who's involved, everyone who's a hand in this, from Judas down to the priests to the Romans, for everyone involved, everyone in the crowd, everyone who said what they said to him, every insult, and then the two on each side of him. He is the only way. I go back to John 14:6. The only way to God, if they were to realize that. He's the truth of God, and he is the life. They're putting the one who said, "I am the life," to death. Right? We go back to the Creator in Genesis 1. They're putting God to death. And this, I mean, what pain Mary was experiencing this time. So he saw his mother in verse 26. So Jesus then saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby. So we take it that there was some time that passed. They were not there at the very start. But eventually they make contact, and John is there, the only one that was there at the cross. And look at the loving Jesus. He said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." He is experiencing this excruciating, embarrassing death. And who's he concerned about right now? Or who does he show concern for? His mother. Behold your son. And he's talking about John. Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." From that hour, the disciple took her into his own household. So here he is, concerned and still honoring his mother at this point. And this is a really interesting lesson here, because Jesus has brothers, including James, who we have the book of James after, who becomes such a great church leader. But James, the problem is James doesn't believe at this point. His brothers were unbelievers. Isn't that something? And he says, "Well, I want my mother to be in a care of one of my disciples." That's how important it is that she's taken care of, not by them, but by John at this time. So he's saying, since I'm not going to be here, I'm about to die in any way, he will rise, but he's not going to be available. Things are going to be different, and he's going to make his appearances, but his time is almost up. And he says, "John, this is now your mother. Take care of her." From that hour, the disciple took her into his own household. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things had already been accomplished to fulfill the scripture, said, "I am thirsty." And a jar full of sour wine was standing there, so they put a sponge full of the sour wine upon a branch of hyssop and brought it up to his mouth. Therefore, when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished." He didn't mumble this in the other accounts, and this was cried in a loud voice, because he just endured. Let's think about this. He just endured the wrath of God, right? This darkness that we read of, and we'll use Matthew's as an example, is not here in John. He's focusing on other things, but that had already happened. And it's over. The suffering has come to an end, and it is finished. You know, his mission for, let's go back to Matthew 1:21 one more time. For he will save his people. You will name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. That was his mission. Mission accomplished. That he paid for the sins of his people. All of them. Great and small. Well, that's how we look at them. And to make this personal, I wrote a few of these things down. that what did Jesus bear on the cross? And this is just a short list. The things we should think about. That Jesus was punished for, and think about this, he was alone with our sins, right? He was alone, all alone with the sins of all of God's people. I'm not just saying like some general thing, very specific things that he was conscious of. No unconscious suffering here. For every time we've used God's name in vain, it's not even just the way we think about it. When we use God's name in a common way, for every time that we've worshipped anything or anyone but God, for every lie that we have ever told, for everything that we have ever stolen, he was punished. For every lustful look or thought or evil imagination, whatever it might be, he was punished. Every time we've compromised or watered down the truth, he was punished. For every time that, how about this one? Our will came before God's will. Every time that you failed to love God with your entire being, which guess what is never. Every time you failed to glorify God, every time that we failed to love our neighbor as ourselves. And we could just go on and on and on. These are some of the things that were laid upon him, and he made his own sins. But it's always very important to say, although he was made sin for us, he bore our sins, he himself never was a sinner. Didn't make him sin. He was never personally defiled by any of this. And I love saying this, that when Jesus went to the cross, as it does not matter how bad he looked, it doesn't matter how many times they struck him, hit him, whipped him, whatever they did, they put a crown of thorns on his head. He was the greatest success there ever was. And he could say something that none of us could say. I kept the law. I kept the law. I lived a righteous life, and all I ever did was please God. That's the one that went to the cross. The righteous one, we talked about righteousness, the one who met all of God's standards. He was holy. He was blameless. He was sinless. He was impeccable. He was immaculate. He was the covenant keeper. He was the one that was nailed to the cross. And what's so powerful is that you think about those disciples. Think about those 11 who belonged to him. They abandoned him. They ran for their lives. Yeah, eventually John comes back. But all of them fell short. All of them failed. Yet, there he was, completely committed to them. And while they failed him and disowned him, he bore their sins. That should hit us right here. No greater love than the love of Christ. So, we see the awfulness of man and everything that man did that was evil and wrong that they did, and all the hatred toward Jesus. And man really did his worst. But the good news is God did his best.
I have to know a little more in order to.
So I say again that man did his worst to Jesus on the cross, but then God did his best. For what they meant for evil, God meant for good. Going back to Joseph. And the true fulfillment of that verse is here. I mean, this is the heart of Christianity, that this is a substitutionary death. I mean, this is him standing in our place and dying. And maybe we're just so used to it, but sometimes we need to step back and think about forgiveness of sins. That sins, we take it for granted. Sins there were forgiven because of what he did and what he was willing to experience on our behalf. And, when he's on the cross, that God is proven to be more than just love. We say, and that's what usually is, it's just, well, there's the love of God. That's the greatest sign and act and demonstration of God's love was at the cross. Absolutely true. But there's more to it than that. God takes sin seriously, and that nothing will go unpunished. Because if we see this right, remember that Jesus was punished to the full extent, that he was not spared, that he was not shown any mercy there by God. Justice was served there at the cross. Because everyone has to receive justice. We talked about that actually the last study, was that people want to take the claws and the teeth out of God because they just want God to be loved. I'm not saying everyone. If we're Christians, that better not be us. But so many people who say they are, they just want God to be love. But God is also just, and he must punish the guilty. And if you remove the justice of God, then you ungod God. And he is no longer the God of the Bible. I was going to talk more, and we are seriously wrapping up the study part of this, about the pain of the cross. I wanted to say more of that. Perhaps there'll be another day, the physical pain. But you have to remember, it's so true. When Jesus was on the cross, the first 3 hours, he was just receiving the worst from men. The last 3 hours, it was God dealing with God, and that was when he was there, and God pours out that holy wrath upon him. But this is the good news, though. It is finished. Like, we're not talking about Easter tonight. I'm not talking about resurrection, but I want to end with some of the positives here. That the good news is that God is a just God, that yes, he punished Jesus for his people's sins. Because of that, they don't receive that in the future at any point. And it would be unjust for God to punish the same sins twice. And that's a theological problem for a lot of people. That God is, he's perfect. He's perfect how he planned all of this out. And I'm just going to look at two scriptures really fast. John 10. This is what's amazing about what Jesus did. John 10. In verse 17 and 18. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life so that I may take it up again. No one has taken it away from me, speaking of his life, but I lay it down on my own initiative, and I have the authority to lay it down, and I have the authority to take it up again. So, as awful, again, as terrible, as painful his suffering was, what he did was he decided when it was time. I mean, once he paid for sin, he lays down his life. You know, he dismisses his spirit. And no one can do that. No one can say, well, this is when I choose to die. This is how I choose to go out. What's also great news is, yes, we talked about from the perspective of us, that we don't have to pay for the penalty of our sins that we so rightly deserve by putting our faith in Jesus, our trust in Jesus, that we throw all confidence upon Jesus, that we commit to Jesus. And one of these times, we're actually going to talk about and unpack what faith means, because saving faith is rarely ever explained. It's just believe. That's it. That is not a biblical definition of faith. Yes, forever who's out there in the world, that is not a biblical definition of faith. Just believe. And that angers me. It does. That's just not giving the whole story. I think I lost my point, but yes, it is finished, that you don't have to face the penalty of your sin. When you, yes, put your faith in Jesus, and we're talking about a belief, a trust, and a commitment. That's what goes into it. And I wish I could say more. You don't have to face the penalty of your sins. I'm saying it over and over again because that is the good news, because he took hell for us. And that's eternal. He died an eternal death. That's how bad his death was. How God did that, I can't explain it, but it's what the scriptures teach. That, again, he could bear that in that time because of who he was. He kept, yes, this is what I want to get to. That was the good news from our perspective, but from his perspective, he never has to suffer again. Right? Because again, this is actually more about him than it is about us. When he was done on the cross and he said, it is finished, suffering's over. Never again will Jesus suffer at the hand of man, the hand of anyone. He is back after he was raised, after he went back to heaven. He's back where he belongs. King of kings, Lord of lords. Not that he ever lost that, but he has the full experience and he's back on the throne again. And the last thing, or sorry, two things here I have. Hebrews 12:2 is, I didn't get to this because we did a Matthew study on Wednesday. So today I just wrote this down on a piece of paper for my lady. I just here, right here. I'm going to personally hand this to you. Do what you want with it. But this is amazing about what Jesus did. It says, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So we said it was painful. It was humiliating. It was an eternal death. And his soul suffered, and he was alone with sins, and he was separated from God. He bore his wrath, all those things, but he never lost his perspective. He always had the big picture in mind. He didn't lose his perspective even as he went through all that. It was for the joy set before him. He could see down the line, and he knew he was going to get this done. He wasn't sitting there, hanging there, doubting. It was just a matter of going through this and getting it done. And yeah, what I was going to say was this death. I mean, what would have been you would take the hangman's noose over this, you take the electric chair over this, you take the gas chamber over this. Those would be merciful compared to what he dealt with. But he, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross. And what was that joy? Was, people would say saving his people. Yeah. But going back where he belonged again. Going back home for him. And not only that, but he will have physical kingdom in the future. I mean, what you read of in Revelation. That's what's waiting for him. He gets all the worship that he deserves. And he purchased his bride. And I like to say this, it's not that I started it myself, but it stayed with me when I heard it. Why does he love us? He loves us because he loves us. There's nothing within us to make us lovable. He loves us because he loves us. And this is my final point, that because of what we've seen, and I know I haven't said what I wanted to say, or the way I wanted to say it this evening, that so much more could have been said. It could have been said better. But we saw his suffering, physical, soul suffering. We were loved more than be loved by anyone. And he didn't hold anything back. He gave it all. He gave his whole self. He sacrificed himself, the perfect one. We can never say, if we have this before us and we think about it regularly, we get down, we get discouraged. That's human. We're all going to get there. We go through times of depression when we're down. But we can never say that we are not loved. And you can't be loved more than this. You can never say that no one cares. As he went through this, he did go through a living hell because of love for his people. And hey, that's why we're here tonight. We're here tonight because of what he did. We love him because he first loved us. 1 John. So we give thanks. We give thanks and remember what he did this night. And remembering it, I will finish, is not doing it once a week. Remembering it is not doing it once a month at communion. It means more than that. Okay. Questions, thoughts, observations from the study. I know it's extremely late, but I trust that this was a blessing and you received truth tonight. And that we take these things to heart, but we also leave feeling more loved than we have before. This is a great time to ask questions. It's a great time for anything or further explanation on something. Or we could wrap it up. Okay, it is the time it is. Yeah,
And then
meditate it.
back with
on it.
questions. Yes.
Yeah, certainly that would be this is a fitting time for that. And the plan is to go back to Genesis 3.
Yeah.
And if you have questions from this one, you have some time to think about it. Of course, you can bring them up next time. They don't have to wait till the end. You can ask them at the start. Okay, then. Well, guys, good study. Thanks for being with me. And I know it's long, but this was a good time to do this. So we finished there. Good night.